have it in mind. I'm going to have you in mind. One sec. Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asuk b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Arev na Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu v'fi b'cha beit Yisrael v'niyeh אנחנו וצאצאינו וצאצאי ב'cha beit Yisrael כולנו יודעי שמך ולומדי תורתך לשמה ברוך אתה אדוני מלמד תורה לעמו ישראל. אמן.
Amen.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר בך בנו מכל עמים ונתן לנו את תורתו ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen.
Okay, so we were learning about Al Netilat Yadayim, right? So I'm going to tell you some things that are halachic, but they should be obvious. If a person is in the middle of his meal, touches a part of his body that was covered, he needs to wash a proper Netilat Yadayim procedure without a bracha, the same as if he needs the lube. Okay? I'm personally very happy if you're going to touch the communal popcorn that you wash your hands if you play with your covered bits. But that's just me. But I would suggest that you do a proper Netilat Yadayim. So one is a hygiene issue, and the second one is a spiritual issue. If you touch your hair covered by your kippah, you'd also need to rewash. If somebody has no hair, as we're getting older, this halacha is becoming less relevant. If you have no hair, you can touch your hair if you're bald. It's only if there's hair underneath your kippah. There's a safek as to whether one's bald, if you can touch your head underneath your kippah, and most say that you can. But if you've got hair, there's also a question that most people say you have to revast your hand, even if it's not covered by your kippah. So again, from a hygiene point of view, it's a good idea anyway. If a person eats something that you dipped in a liquid, or a liquid came onto a food, one still has to wash their hands, but with no bracha. So let me just give you a perfect example. Do you remember when we do the Seder night on Pesach, when you dip your hand in salt water with karpas, with a bitter herb, you actually vas, but there's no bracha. So this is actually where it comes from. So that it comes from the halacha in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, in Gimel, but not all liquids qualify as a mashka. So what's a mashka? You can think of it with the acronym Yad Shochet Dam. So dam is blood. You can't have blood anyway because it's not kosher, but there are certain people that b'kuach nefesh are allowed to have blood if it's life-saving. Are you with me? You can even have treif if it's life-saving for whatever the reason may be. There's certain medications that might have a glycerine sort of base that you can have it, but it's certainly not ideal. But in that particular case, you would obviously have to revast, but no brocha. Anything like wine or honey made from normal honey, date honey, olive oil, or dairy products, or dew, those are things that if they come onto the food, that you would have to revast, but no brocha. And then obviously when you finish, you bench normally. And there's no problem with a liquid like fruit juice getting onto your food. Okay. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. Okay, so guys, let's just get started with the shiur. I'm a little bit dopey because I had a sleeping tablet last night that could have killed a squirrel. So I'm just recovering. It seems like I'm a little bit, face. I hope the shiur is okay. So what happened is we ended off on the note on 11b3. We were discussed that an acquisition of what we called a movable could occur if there was an apotiki. And an apotiki is a specific reference to a movable such as a asset, like a slave. But it didn't occur with animals. Why didn't it occur with animals? For two reasons. Is that one animal is physically not discernible from another, whereas a human being is physically discernible from another. The other reason was that it could become public knowledge because the slave can get testimony and the slave speaks to his friend. Oh, you know, such and such, my master, he got into a debt. He's got a gambling problem. He sold me off. Loser. Okay. So that sort of domestic chit-chat would become common knowledge. I don't know if you know that most break-ins that occur, domestic break-ins, occur from an inside job, whether it's a business that has a robbery or a home. How do they know exactly where to find the jewelry? You think it isn't an inside job? Oh, Arthur can testify. He has a
Twice.
Tama 38,
No,
and
no,
it's happened.
no. In South Africa, we were robbed twice. And it was inside
Yeah,
job. It knew everything. It was the dogs didn't attack him. It was just something.
yeah. Well,
I
that's
leave the house.
exactly. I remember. So that's exactly the case. So most things are inside jobs. So what they're saying is when there's a rumor that spreads, generally when there's smoke, there's fire. It's true. So the slave can speak in terms of testimony before the court, and B, because there's normal rumors and murmurings that occur. So a slave can be an apotiki for that reason. We're not going to discuss about small animals being excluded from an apotiki. That will be a duff that's coming up. In the meantime, 12A1 discusses a case where can movables become attached for a debt with regards to creditors. If there's no apotiki, can you even collect it from the orphans of a deceased debtor? So this is what we're going to discuss if there's no apotiki. So we're on 12A1, and it says often Rav Nachman left the study hall. Ula said to the assembled students, actually, this is what Rav Elazar said. A creditor may collect slaves in payment of a debt, even from the orphans of a deceased debtor. When Rav Nachman heard of Rav Ula's latter statement, he said, Ula evaded me. He feared citing this teaching in my presence, where he was aware that I hold that a slave is regarded as a movable item and thus cannot be collected from orphans. Okay, so I wanted to just discuss these first 2 points. So I don't want you guys to think that Ula was scared of being embarrassed in front of Rav Nachman, because Rav Ula, as you know, when it comes to Torah and somebody's learning incorrectly, you can even correct them. It's not considered embarrassment, because the honor of the Torah is that words should be pronounced well. So you must never think that Ula had some ego problem that he minded being corrected or out-debated by Rav Nachman. That wasn't the case at all. So how you got to see it is as follows. Who was his teacher? Elazar. Rav Elazar was Ula's teacher. So Rav Elazar wasn't alive anymore. So he had a loyal student, Ula. And Ula, like one learns from your teacher, you learn a lot, but some is lost through transmission. In other words, what do we mean some is lost? That the reasons and the rationale that Elazar learned, Rav Elazar learned about certain issues. Rav Ula might know the halacha, but he doesn't know always everything the master knows, or you learn from your teacher, because it's just like when we were doing martial arts. You might get to a black belt or second or third dan, but when your teacher's a 10th dan, Arthur, remember when we were doing full contact jiu-jitsu with Mickey, who's a 10th dan? We would never in a lifetime, we can see why he's doing what he's doing, and we can mimic the action, but exactly the rationale. Arthur's pointing to his baby finger, because Arthur will tell you he threw a big guy with a baby finger. So, this is exactly it. What?
That was me. He did it with a baby finger.
Oh, it was
me.
you?
Yeah, my finger was sore for 3 days after. He took my finger like this, and he threw me like I was like a piece of, and I'm a big dude.
Yeah, I remember. So, that's exactly the point. Sometimes you can mimic what your master does or learn it, but you're not quite at the level to understand how things were put together. So in this particular case, he didn't want his teacher to be embarrassed, because Rav Nachman was formidable as a teacher. And he was more Rav Elazar's contemporary. So if he debated him in public, Rav Ula might not have known all the answers, and therefore his teacher would have come out looking maybe wrong or foolish. And he didn't want to create any dishonor to his teacher, Rav Elazar. But it's not that he was scared of Rav Nachman or looking embarrassed. He didn't want any embarrassment to his teacher. So I think that was a good point to bring, because I didn't quite understand why he would feel awkward. So I was reading some of the commentaries on it. All right. Now, they view it in 2 particularly different ways. So what did we say? We said that Rav Elazar says that a creditor can collect slaves in payment of a debt, even for the orphans of a deceased debtor. Rav Nachman said that this is not the case. So how do they view it all? So Rav Nachman has two basic issues. What's his issue? Does anybody remember from Dur Chazorah over the Shabbos? Guys?
What Rabbi Nachman's issues were?
Yeah, there were two.
Can't remember specifically, but I mean, his major concern was the fact that a slave is a movable property without a doubt.
Good.
That's what he said.
Good.
And
what does Ullah say?
Ullah says that it's not. If the slave was on the property at the time, it's not a movable.
No. You're mixing up two issues. First one.
Okay, that's coming further down. Okay.
Anybody else? That issue was right. That Rav Nachman sees a slave as a movable asset.
So Rabbi Ullah doesn't. He doesn't. He sees it as a more like land.
Yes, perfect. So that's it.
So the other one's still coming. Sorry, I jumped the gun a bit.
So Rav, all in the name of Rav Elazar, says that slaves are like land. Basically Rav Nachman sees it as a movable asset. I'm using the word movable because when we say the word colloquially as property, if I say to you, you can go to my property, Michael, today in colloquial language, it assumes you're going onto my house. It doesn't assume property meaning ownership of assets, both movable and non-movable. Does that make sense? The way we speak today. Go to my property and collect the car. So I'm saying I want to discern when I'm using the term for you guys, for anybody listening, that when I refer to property, I'm referring to land. And when I'm referring to movable assets, I'm referring to one's property, also one's property. But when I say the word property and property, people today are going to get confused. The legal term is it's all your property. One is fixed asset and one is a movable asset. But today we see property as land and we see it as movable. So I'm going to use terms that people understand. Are you okay with it? Because you've got more of a legal background.
Yeah.
You understand.
I'm good. I'm good at legal background, but I understand what you mean.
No. I'm saying we know the legal terms, but anybody listening might confuse the two issues. That's why we're going to have to just keep it very.
The way I looked at it, Damon, when I was going through it, is that you have a fixed property and you have movable property. I use those two terms. So I'm still kept within the definition of property.
That's fine. Fixed property and movable, that's fine. So there's another issue Rav Nachman has. So what is this? So that Rav Nachman agrees, funny enough, that slaves are exegetically referred to as real property in two cases. Okay, in price fraud and the laws of oaths. Let me explain to you what I mean. There are biblical laws and there are rabbinic laws. Okay, there's Doraisa and there's Darabanan. There's rabbinical matters. Now, biblical laws came initially, and rabbinical alterations occurred, not to uproot the biblical laws, but to know that human nature changed, and you had to have laws that were put in place that one person didn't get clever with his fellow Jew. So what he says is Rav Nachman does agree with Rav Elazar that in certain laws, a slave is considered like land. The laws of price fraud and the laws of oaths. It's not the subject of today's discussion. Please God, when we do Bava Basra, it's in 128a. It's also covered in Yevamos 99a, but we're not going to really do Yevamos at that. But Bava Basra...
You said, sorry, it's considered, you said in oaths and what? Price, what? Oaths and?
Okay, so what I was going to say in respect to the laws of oaths. Now, the laws of oaths, I'm going to cover this. There are 17 books in the Schottenstein version of Nazikin. There's 17 volumes. I mean, Bava Kamma's got 3. Bava Basra's got 3. Bava Metzir's got 3. But there's 9 books in the Schottenstein, but there's only 3 actual books in the Gemara. Are you with me? But Schottenstein's broken it up. But in the Schottenstein, there's 17 books. But one of those books, whether you go for the Schottenstein or the normal Sefaria, there's one book called Shavua, which is not weeks, it's oaths. So Shavua, it's oaths. So that's part of the Zikin, because any legal proceeding, whether it's a court case of a capital punishment, which is a death sentence, corporal punishment, which is lashings, or financial restitutions or economic civil cases, you're dealing there with oaths. You have to do an oath. So an oath, there's a whole book on it. Okay.
But you mentioned the other. You mentioned the other thing, oaths, and you said
price fraud. Price fraud is going to be covered in Bava Basra, 128a. We're going to see how it's covered. So in the meantime, just know that in certain biblical cases, slaves are seen as they're exegetically linked to real property. We're going to see what that means of how it works. But that's with respect to biblical laws, mainly price frauds and laws of oath. But there are others. Those are the main ones. But what he says is that with respect to movable items, like you have, like you can attach land and then movables with that, with a kinyan agav, which is an acquisition by dint of. That's what you have in modern law. In other words, the house, inverted commas, and all its assets. Does that make sense? So
well,
those
cattle.
And cattle. But let's talk about a modern house with furniture, etc., when they auction it off. Today, they're wise enough to auction off the furniture separately. But I'm talking about when the sheriff of the court collects, etc. So let's just keep it quite simple. So what I'm saying is the attachment of movable assets with the actual land, but dint of, or basically a kinyan agav, which is the Aramaic term, has to do with the rabbinical matter. So Rav Nachman is only interested in rabbinical matters here. He's not interested in bringing the biblical law because it's not applicable to that particular situation when he was around. Does that make sense? We need to cover a little bit of ground.
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
So the Gemara cites actual rulings about where Rav Nachman, he was quite high up. He had huge jurisdiction. So it gives you an incident in Nahadia. And the judges of Nahadia collected slaves as payment of a debt from orphans of a debtor. And there was a similar incident in Pambadisa. And Rav Chana bar, I'm trying to think as well, Bisma collected slaves as payment of a debt from orphans. So upon hearing of their ruling, Rav Nachman said to them, go and return the slaves, and if you do not, I will collect your own mansions from you and repay the orphans with them. So what he's actually saying is that you've made an error in halacha and you've got to do restitutions. Otherwise, I'm going to basically penalize you from your own assets. So Rav Nachman was obviously a very powerful figure in charge of many different courts. Does that make sense? His was obviously the ruling court. So Rav said to Rav Nachman, I don't quite understand. He says, there's Ula. There's Rav Elazar, there's the judges of Nahadia, and there's Rav Chana bar Bizna. And all of them hold that slaves are regarded as land. Who does master hold like? In other words, he's asking, how come all the major opinions are saying slaves are like land? What do you base your dissenting opinion on? Does that make sense, guys? That's what Rav's asking. Now, there seems to be a bit of an error in the Schottenstein, or maybe I'm reading the error, because it says Rav Nachman replied to Rava. In the first case, it said Rav asked Rav Nachman, and in the second case, it says Rav Nachman replied to Rava. So either Rava asked him the question to start with, or Rav, but he can't be replying to a different person on the question. I need to clarify that with Rabbi Aran Khan. Anyway, so whoever he's responding to says, Rav Nachman said to him, I know of a brisa that supports my view. For Avimi taught in a brisa, a prosbul takes effect upon debts secured by land. So that's his first proof. The prosbul takes effect upon debts secured by land, but it does not take effect upon debts secured by slaves. And the second proof is, and movables can be acquired together with land, but they cannot be acquired together with slaves. Both of these rulings show that slaves are regarded as movable items, and for this reason, Rav Nachman holds that slaves may not be collected from orphans. So guys, I want you to repeat to me the two different reasons. I've just said them. Guys?
So the one reason is that Rabbi Nachman refers to what's called slaves as movable property.
No, we know that. I'm saying, what is two bases? We know that. I've just read it. So I'm agreeing with you, Gab.
No.
What are these two reasons? You guys learned this with Shabbos.
I think just repeat it. Sorry.
Okay. You said awkward silence. I'm going to.
I listened, but I didn't quite. Obviously, didn't remember it. Go ahead.
All right, guys. Just remember in your head. Listen, I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I just remember two discussions in my head. Very simple. Number one, there's an issue of a prosbul, and that's in Kedushin 26a to 27a.
What is a prosbul? I think that's why I battled. Just explain what that is.
I'll explain what a prosbul is now. So first thing is
I think that's why we're battling. We didn't understand that.
Yeah, just give me a chance. First thing is a prosbul. That's number one you have to keep in the head. I will explain what a prosbul is. The second one is that slaves, movables cannot be acquired with slaves. Movables can be acquired with land. There's something called a kinyan agav. And in secular law, it's called acquisition in dint of, which means movables can be attached to land. When you purchase land, you can purchase movables along with it. But because you can't purchase movables along with slaves, it proves, according to Rav Nachman, that slaves are not land. And the fact that you can't get a prosbul on slaves, but you can get it on land. So before we even understand what a prosbul is, if you can get a prosbul, if the debtor owes you land, if the debtor has land, he can give you a prosbul, but he can't do that if it's slaves. You can clearly see then that slaves are not considered land, even if you don't understand what a prosbul is. Does that make sense?
It's a lien, basically.
No, it's not.
Financial instrument.
It's
a prosbul is something happens around about
session.
So that they basically write up a document. Okay.
Yes.
Very good.
That transfers
Very good.
the land, protects them against the land or something like that.
Very good.
Yes. Yes.
Very good. So I'm going to explain what a prosbul is. Arthur, very, 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 very good. All right. So let me just explain to you what that means. Now, a prosbul is basically a document in which a creditor transfers his debts to the court. So this is where it comes from. In Gittin, which is your laws of divorce, on 36a. In 36a, it explains the entire need for this document. You must look it up in Gittin. So the Torah mandates that all outstanding debts be cancelled at the end of every Shemitah year. So towards the end of the second temple area, Hillel, you have Hillel and Beis Shammai. So Hillel noted, and Hillel, one of his wonderful characteristics is he was compassionate about people. He noted that people would refrain from lending money close to the Shemitah year because they were worried that they wouldn't get it back. And he says this is in violation of the Torah's injunction. So in Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 9, it says, "Take heed lest your heart entertain a subversive thought, saying, the seventh year, the Shemitah year is approaching, and you will look unkindly upon your impoverished brother and not give him a loan." So to alleviate this problem, Hillel ordained that before the Shemitah year, one draw up a prosbul document. So you transfer the outstanding loan to the court. In other words, Michael, you owe me money, right? On the Shemitah year, I can't collect anymore. If I transfer the document and you want to start to borrow in the end of the 6th year, I'm going to get jittery that the loan is going to be written off, because all loans are cancelled on the Shemitah year, on the 7th year. I'm not going to lend you money. So then what happens is, as Arthur quite rightly said, is that the document is written out where you pay the court, because loans owned by the court are not cancelled by Shemitah.
I remember now. Sorry, I remember.
Yeah.
So, right, and your subsequent collection is you become an agent of the court, or the court collects on your behalf and gives it back to you. Okay, fine. So that way, people are still going to lend. But they were very nervous to uproot the Torah, because the ideal position is you have mercy on your brother, even if the debt's written off. Okay, so according to Bava Basra 65b to 66a, the Rashbam brings some commentaries and Rashi on Bava Basra 27a. This is part of this whole discussion. So a prosper is only written to enable collection of a debt that is secured by land. So Rashi explains that this is because the formula of a prosper states that the lender is to be given the right to collect the debt whenever he wishes. So since land cannot be hidden away or used up, such a declaration allows us to consider land as if it's already been collected by the lender before the Shemitah year. That's kind of the, the loophole. Although the actual collection takes place after the Shemitah, and this is allowed by rabbinical decree, the sages didn't want to uproot the enactment. Does that make sense? So what it's saying, guys, is as follows. Is it couldn't attach it to movable assets, because you could sell your movable assets, they could get damaged, they could get hidden away, or you can actually use them up. So they're not considered to be in the possession of the lender until they're actually collected. But when you have land, the land doesn't disappear. It doesn't get up and walk or get used up or hidden away or sold or whatever the case may be. It's actually a physical, immovable piece of land. So then,
sorry, Damon. So is this actually a lien on the borrower's land, effectively, that's been kept by the court?
In a way, that's true. That's true. But sorry guys, I've got 7 minutes left, Michael. Let me just finish and then I'll answer any questions you have.
Sorry, okay.
No, it's fine.
James,
so I'm saying you could have a lien. Okay, Michael, you could technically have a lien on movables. But what they were worried about is that movables, the guy could say, listen, he used up the item, it broke. He could sell it in the interim. You don't know what sort of dodgy guy you're dealing with.
I get that.
So what I'm saying is, with land, the guy can't up and disappear with the land. You must know that even when the bank gives you money for a car, they keep your car papers. They don't trust you with the car. The bank keeps the car papers. They only transfer ownership of the car once the last payment is made. But the guy owns his own assets yet, so it's very difficult to extract it back. So what happens in this particular case is, say the borrower doesn't have any land. Okay. So so before we get to that, why are we saying that it's already collected? Is because in the prosper document, it's basically saying, listen, this land, consider it as if it's collected. And then in reality, whether he collects it before the Shemitah year or after the Shemitah year, before the Shemitah period begins or after, it's irrelevant. The land's not going anywhere. So in the document, it basically says that this is my land and I can collect it whenever I want. But you're not worried that the land's going to disappear. So that's why it's done according to land. So it's actually not, though it's technically acquired after the Shemitah year, it can be collected before because it's not going anywhere. So in the document, it's saying that it's collected before. Does that make sense, Michael?
Yes. Okay.
Fine. So what happens is if the borrower doesn't have any land, the lender can give him a small parcel of land. So you're saying, well, why would he do that? Because what he's doing is he's lending the guy money. He's lending the guy money, and then he's lending him land. He's going to doubly lose. He's not. Because say the guy's got all these movable assets, Okay, for example, all these movable assets. Then in that particular case, he gives him a tiny piece of land and attaches all the guy's movable assets to this land. So he's gained all those movable assets. He wants to help the guy and he gets his land back. There's no losing. So, but it has to constitute, according to the legal document in Shibes chapter 10, verse 6, that's the particular case. And this is approved by Rach Nachman that a slave is seen as movable property because you can't do a presbal with it. Let's just discuss what a kinyan agav is a second. So a kinyan agav is basically movables that can be acquired together with land. And Rav Nachman's second proof is that movables can't be acquired together with slaves. So if it can't be acquired together with slaves, it's technically movable. Otherwise, if it was considered land, you could get movables along with slaves. Okay, and this you can also find in Tractate Kedushin 26a to 27b. So if one sells movable property with land, the act of acquiring the land by any method effective for land suffices to acquire the movable property as well. And no act of acquisition upon the movables is necessary. Such acquisition of movable property through the acquisition of land is known as a kinyan agav, literally acquisition by dint of. So it's all in Kedushin 26a to 27a. Okay, so the Tana of the Brisa, he's of the opinion that slaves are treated as movables and they can't cause movable purchase along with them to be acquired through the mechanism of kinyan agav. Does that make sense, guys?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. So before we go on, I think we're going to end off on this note. Does it make any sense?
No, Damon, it does.
Yeah, it's clear now.
I'm going